I always knew life wasn't fair, but nothing quite drove the point home like watching my sister glide through med school debt-free while I drowned in student loans. Ever since we were kids, Clara had been the golden child, the one my parents paraded around at every family gathering, the one whose achievements were celebrated like national holidays, the prodigy, the future doctor, the pride of the family. And me? I was just Alex, the other child. I spent years convincing myself I wasn't bitter, but the truth was, no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the resentment festered. It built up with every time my parents wrote checks for Clara's private tutors, while I scrambled to afford textbooks. It deepened when they furnished her off-campus apartment, while I lived in a tiny, roach-infested studio. It hardened with every passing year, every ignored milestone of mine, every moment I was treated as an afterthought. It all came to a head the night of Clara's grand celebration. I hadn't planned on attending. The invitation was just a formality, a reminder that my role in the family was to stand in the background and clap. No one expected me to make an appearance. No one expected me to matter. And for a long time, I believed them. But then, something happened. The night before the party, I got a message from my grandmother, Eleanor. "Proud of you, Alex. Call me when you can." Unlike my parents, Grandma Eleanor never played favorites. She had been my anchor, the only one who ever made me feel like I was enough. She had taken me in when my parents decided that raising both children was too much of a financial strain. At just 7 years old, I was shipped off to live with her under the excuse that Grandma could use the company. Even then I knew the truth. I wasn't needed. I was just extra baggage. But Grandma never saw me that way. So when she asked me to call, I did. The moment she picked up, I could hear the warmth in her voice. "I was starting to think you forgot about me, sweetheart." "Never, Grandma. Just a long day, I bet." There was a pause, then a knowing sigh. "Clara's party is tomorrow." I didn't answer. "And you're going?" I hesitated. "I don't know yet." She sighed again, and somehow it carried all the weight of unspoken disappointment. "Alex, you do know you have a choice, right? You always have a choice." I frowned. "It's not that simple." "Isn't it?" she countered. "Because, from where I'm sitting, it sounds pretty straightforward. You can either keep playing along with their little game, or you can start thinking about what's best for you." I leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. The apartment light flickered again, another problem I'd been meaning to fix, but never had the time or money to. The place was quiet except for the distant sound of sirens and the upstairs neighbor's terrible taste in music. I closed my eyes. It's not that I want to go. It's just, if I don't, it'll be another reason for them to pretend I don't exist. "Sweetheart." Grandma's voice softened. "They already pretend you don't exist." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. "Listen to me, Alex," she continued. "I know you. You've spent your whole life working twice as hard to prove you belong. But at some point, you have to ask yourself, when is it your turn?" My grip tightened around the phone. I thought about every holiday, every family dinner where Clara was the center of attention, while I was nothing more than an afterthought. I thought about every award I won that was met with a shrug, while Clara's smallest achievements were treated like historic events. Now, they wanted me to stand there and applaud her again. "I just don't know if it's worth it," I muttered. Grandma let out a soft laugh, full of love but tinged with sadness. "Alex, you've always put your head down and worked hard. But sometimes, sweetheart, the real victory isn't proving them wrong. It's proving yourself right." I swallowed hard. "I'll think about it. Whatever you decide," she said. "Just know that I am proud of you." The line went silent, but her words lingered. I sat there, phone in hand, staring at nothing for a long time. Then another message popped up. "Dr. Thomas Caldwell. Need to speak with you. Urgent." Dr. Caldwell was one of the most respected figures in neurosurgery, a man whose word carried weight in the medical world. I had spent months working under him, long nights in the research lab, pushing myself beyond exhaustion, all while Clara enjoyed vacations in Cabo and Aspen, fully funded by my parents. So why was he calling me now? I took a deep breath and dialed. The phone barely rang before he picked up. "Alex, glad you called. I have big news." My stomach twisted. "What kind of news? You got it." I frowned. "Got what?" "The Rivers Fellowship." I nearly dropped the phone. The Rivers Fellowship was one of the most prestigious honors a medical student could receive. It came with a research grant, direct access to top-tier hospitals, and, most importantly, complete student loan forgiveness. My pulse pounded in my ears. That's not possible," I said, barely able to process it. People spend years networking, pulling every string they can to get this. How? You earned it, Alex. Dr. Caldwell interrupted, his tone firm. Your work speaks for itself. I couldn't breathe. Then, as if my night couldn't get more surreal, he added, there's one more thing. Some of the key members of the fellowship committee will be at your sister's event tomorrow night. The director of the program is making an appearance. This is your chance to make an impression before the official announcement. I exhaled sharply. Of course. It had to be at Clara's party. I could already see it, my parents' forced smiles, the polite applause that would last all of 3 seconds before they redirected the conversation back to Clara. And Clara, she would hate it. Not openly, of course. She was too good at playing the perfect daughter, but she would find a way to remind me that this was her night. I ran a hand through my hair. I had spent my entire life watching Clara steal the spotlight. Every birthday where her gifts were twice as extravagant as mine. Every Christmas when she got the latest gadgets while I got socks. Every achievement of mine that was barely acknowledged. But now, I had a chance to change that. For the first time in my life, I had something they couldn't ignore. The weight of my student debt, the years of struggling, the endless feeling of being second best, it all felt lighter. But was I ready for the fallout? I didn't know. All I knew was that tomorrow I was walking into that party. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be in Clara's shadow. I was about to step into the spotlight. And I had no idea how my family was going to take it. Walking into the restaurant that night, I knew exactly what kind of evening this was going to be. The place was the definition of extravagant crystal chandeliers, imported white tablecloths, an overpriced wine list that was probably longer than most medical textbooks. The kind of place my parents loved to host events in. The kind of place that screamed, look how successful we are. Except, of course, that success had only ever been about Clara. Everywhere I looked, her name was plastered across banners, floral arrangements, and table centerpieces. Congratulations, Dr. Clara Hayes. Her name was printed on the napkins, the party favors. Even the massive cake had her name written in golden frosting, like she had just won the Nobel Prize. And me? Nothing. Not a single mention that their other child had also graduated from med school. Not one sign that I even existed in this family, outside of being an accessory to Clara's endless list of accomplishments. I wasn't even surprised, just tired. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne. I took a glass and moved to the edge of the room, blending into the background where I knew no one would be looking for me. Across the restaurant, my parents were entertaining a group of guests, laughing in sync with whatever impressive thing Clara was saying. She was in the middle of some exaggerated story, probably about how difficult med school had been for her, conveniently leaving out the part where she had private tutors, fully covered tuition, and never had to work a single shift in her life. I exhaled slowly, rolling my shoulders to shake off the tension. Then I saw him, Dr. Stephen Graham, the man my parents had spent months trying to impress the director of the prestigious residency program Clara was applying to. The real reason for this party. Sure, they would say it was to celebrate Clara's success, but we all knew the truth. This was about securing her future, making sure she had every advantage possible. I clenched my jaw, pushing down the frustration. I had spent my whole life watching my parents do this, strategically networking, pulling strings, making sure Clara never had to face real competition. But tonight, for the first time, I had something they hadn't accounted for. I took a slow sip of champagne, mentally preparing myself. I had never been good at playing their games, but tonight I was about to flip the board. Across the room, at a small round table tucked away from the crowd, sat Grandma Eleanor. She wasn't talking to anyone, wasn't caught up in the artificial excitement. She was just watching. When she saw me, her eyes lit up, and for the first time that night, I felt like I actually existed. I made my way over. She reached for my hand and gave it a squeeze. I always knew you'd get there on your own, she said softly. I just wish they'd see it too. The warmth in her voice almost made me forget where I was. Almost. Right on cue, my mother appeared beside us, her too wide party smile plastered on like she had rehearsed it in the mirror. There you are, Alex. Can you do me a favor? Some of the tables still don't have menus. Just double check, will you? I stared at her. I wasn't a guest at this party. I was the help. Grandma still held my hand. She gave a small squeeze like she knew exactly what I was thinking. I nodded slowly, set my untouched champagne down, and turned away. Because for the last time in my life, I was going to play along. And after tonight, I never would again. I moved through the room, pretending to check menus, but really, I was observing. Doctors were discussing their latest research. Someone was bragging about their summer home in the Hamptons. Another guest was debating which private school had the best tennis program for their 5-year-old. This was my parents' world, a place where appearances mattered more than people. A waiter passed by with a tray of appetizers, and I grabbed one, a tiny, overpriced puff pastry stuffed with something that tasted vaguely like crab, but mostly like air. Then, as if she had a sixth sense for knowing when someone else might be getting attention, Clara turned and locked eyes with me. Her smile faltered, just for a split second, and in that second I saw the flicker of recognition, the unspoken reminder that this was her night, that I was just a guest at it. Then she recovered, flashing her perfect, rehearsed smile before turning back to her audience. I turned toward the bar. I needed something stronger than champagne. That's when I met him. A man in a tailored suit stood beside me, ordering a whiskey neat. He glanced over, gave me a polite nod. "You must be Clara's brother." For the first time tonight, someone was acknowledging I existed. I nodded. "Yeah, Alex." He extended a hand. "Dr. Graham." I shook it, keeping my face neutral. "Nice to meet you. Your parents speak highly of Clara." Of course they did. I kept my expression unreadable. "She's done well." Dr. Graham took a sip of his drink, studying me. "And you? I hear you graduated med school too." It was the first time anyone had acknowledged it. I nodded. "Yeah, I did." He smiled slightly. "Impressive. What's next for you?" Before I could answer, Clara was suddenly there, standing beside us with that same perfect, effortless charm. And then she did something unexpected. She looked at me, really looked at me. And for the first time in our lives, she said something I never thought I'd hear from her. "This isn't fair." I blinked. I must have misheard her. But she wasn't done. We graduated together. Same degree, same school. And yet, this whole thing, it's like I'm the only one who matters. I studied her, waiting for the catch, the twist, the part where she reminded me that this was her night. But there was no smugness, no condescension, just something that almost sounded like regret. "Why are you telling me this?" The words came out before I could stop them. She hesitated, then let out a quiet breath. "Because it's wrong. I never really saw it before. Not like this." And for the first time in my life, I didn't know what to say to her. Before I could respond, another voice cut in. "Alex, our mother, of course." She barely spared Clara a glance before turning to me, her smile still perfectly in place. "Make sure your grandmother doesn't say anything embarrassing tonight." I stared at her, waiting for some kind of follow-up, some half-hearted acknowledgement that I was also her child, that this was also my night. But nothing came. Just another reminder that I was here to play a role, to make sure things ran smoothly. For Clara, for the first time in my life, I felt something inside me snap. I exhaled sharply, setting my empty glass down with a little too much force. Clara was still beside me, watching, waiting to see what I'd do. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, straightened my jacket, and walked away, straight toward Dr. Caldwell. It was time. Dinner had just begun when my father stood up, tapping his fork against his glass. The room fell silent almost instantly. Every conversation, every hushed whisper died down as people turned to face him. He beamed, scanning the crowd like a king, about to bestow honors upon his chosen heir. "We always knew Clara would be an exceptional doctor," he began, his voice ringing through the room. "From the moment she was a little girl, it was clear she had a gift. We did everything we could to support her, to give her the opportunities she deserved. And now, look at her, a brilliant, accomplished young woman, ready to take on the world." Applause erupted. I sat there, waiting. Maybe, just maybe, he'd throw in a mention of my graduation. A quick, and of course, Alex too. But it never came. Not even a passing comment. Clara shifted slightly beside me. For the first time in our lives, I think she felt it too, that invisible, undeniable line between us. The difference in how we were treated. The way our father spoke about her, like she was the family's greatest achievement, while I was just there. I clenched my jaw, my pulse pounding in my ears. Before the applause fully settled, another voice cut through the noise. "Actually," Dr. Caldwell said, rising to his feet, "I think we should acknowledge another incredible achievement tonight." Silence. My father hesitated, clearly caught off guard. He didn't like being interrupted. He definitely wasn't used to losing control of the conversation. But Caldwell continued, completely unfazed. "Alex Hayes has just been awarded the Rivers Fellowship, one of the most prestigious honors. a young medical researcher can receive. This means full funding for his research, a placement in a top-tier hospital, and perhaps most significantly, complete student loan forgiveness. The words hung in the air like a live wire. A few guests gasped. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances. The clinking of silverware stopped. Glasses hovered midair, forgotten. For the first time in my life, a room full of people were seeing me not as Clara's brother, not as an afterthought, but as someone who had done something on my own. Clara turned her head toward me. Her eyes slightly widened. Even she hadn't seen this coming. My mother blinked, her perfectly curated expression faltering for just a second. My father's jaw tightened, his fingers still gripping the edge of his champagne glass. And then there was Grandma Eleanor. Sitting at the far end of the table, her knowing smile said everything. She had been waiting for this moment all along. The silence stretched long enough to be uncomfortable. Then, someone, Dr. Graham, of all people, began clapping, slow at first. Then others joined in, hesitant, but genuine. Clara exhaled, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. She was the first to turn fully toward me, lifting her glass in my direction. A silent acknowledgement. My father set his glass down with a little too much force. My mother reached for her napkin, dabbing the corners of her lips, as if she needed time to process what had just happened. And then my father finally spoke. "So, Alex," he said, voice steady but laced with something I couldn't quite place. "Tell us more about this fellowship." And just like that, all eyes were on me. The night was far from over. The moment my father spoke, the weight in the room shifted. For the first time, people weren't looking at Clara. They were looking at me. I let the silence stretch just a second longer than necessary before finally answering. "The Rivers Fellowship is a full sponsorship for medical research," I said, keeping my voice even. "It means I'll be working with some of the top neurosurgeons in the country. It's a rare opportunity. Only a handful of students receive it each year." Dr. Graham, the man my parents had spent the entire night trying to impress for Clara's sake, nodded in approval. "It's a remarkable achievement," he said. "Your research must have been exceptional to be selected." I didn't miss the way my father's jaw clenched. "Yes," I said simply. "It was." For once, I didn't downplay my success. I didn't add a joke to make myself seem smaller. I let them sit with the fact that I had accomplished something entirely on my own. The energy at the table changed. Conversations that had been exclusively about Clara's future started shifting. People were murmuring about me. Professors I barely spoke to in school were now approaching me, asking about my research, my future plans. And my parents? They didn't know what to do with it. My mother was the first to attempt damage control. She forced a tight smile and stepped forward. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, her voice light, like this was some small oversight. I set my glass down and met her gaze. "Did you ever ask?" That stopped her. For a second, she seemed like she might argue, but then she hesitated, because we both knew the answer. She had never asked. Neither of them had. They had been so focused on Clara's future, so consumed with ensuring she succeeded, that they never once considered that I might have ambitions of my own. My father cleared his throat, stepping in. "This is a big deal, son. We're proud of you." I almost laughed. He said it like he was trying the words on for the first time. "Thanks," I said, not bothering to pretend I believed him. I felt Clara's eyes on me. She hadn't spoken since the announcement, but when I turned to look at her, there was no jealousy in her expression, no irritation, just something close to understanding. For the first time in our lives, I think she saw it the way things had always been stacked in her favor. "Alex," she said quietly, as if testing out the words, "I'm happy for you." And this time, I believed her. But the night wasn't over yet. Somewhere in the room, Grandma Eleanor sat with a small, knowing smile. She hadn't needed me to prove anything to her. She had always known I was capable of this. And soon, I would realize this moment, this dinner, was about more than just recognition. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The applause had settled, but the weight of the moment lingered in the air. For the first time, my parents had been forced to acknowledge me, to see me. But I wasn't foolish enough to believe that one moment could undo years of being an afterthought. Still, I could feel the shift. And it wasn't just in the way people were looking at me, it was in the way Clara was looking at them. Something in her expression had cracked, but before I could process it, my mother reached for her wine glass and spoke again. "Well, Alex, "This is quite the surprise," she said, her tone a little too forced. "Of course, we would have helped if you had let us know about this earlier." I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "Would you?" I asked, because I don't recall anyone offering to help when I was drowning in tuition debt. Her face tightened. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "What's not fair is that Clara had everything paid for, and I was left to fend for myself." The table went silent. Clara didn't jump in to defend them, and that was when I knew. She wasn't oblivious. She had simply never questioned it before. I could see it in her eyes. This was the first time she was looking at our family and realizing that the way things had always been wasn't normal. And then she did something I never expected. She turned to our father and asked, "Why?" Our father exhaled sharply. He looked at Clara like she had betrayed him by even asking. "You needed the help," he said finally. "Alex didn't." Clara's brow furrowed. "What does that even mean?" My father's jaw clenched. "You were the investment. Alex was different. I didn't even know how to respond to that. Clara didn't either. "Dad, that doesn't make any sense." Our mother, who had been sitting silently, suddenly stood. "This is not the time for this conversation." Clara ignored her. "No, I want to understand." She turned back to our father. "Why did you treat us so differently?" The silence stretched. And then, finally, he said it. "Because he isn't ours." The words hit me like a fist to the chest. The room blurred around me. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. But the stunned expressions around the table told me I hadn't. Clara looked just as shocked as I felt. "What?" My father ran a hand through his hair, looking furious not because he had said it, but because he had been forced to say it. We took him in. His voice was cold now, but he was never ours. I didn't realize I was gripping the edge of the table until I felt my nails digging into my palm. "So what?" I said, my voice eerily calm. "You kept me out of pity?" He didn't answer, but that was the answer. My mother's silence confirmed it too. Clara turned to her. "Mom?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "I spent my entire life thinking I was part of this family, that I was just less important to you. And now you're telling me I wasn't even supposed to be here in the first place?" No one answered. I stood up so fast my chair nearly toppled over. Grandma Eleanor was still seated at the far end of the table. She hadn't reacted with shock, only sadness. She knew. I turned to her, my voice quieter now. "Grandma?" Her eyes softened. "Come with me, Alex." Without looking back at my so-called parents, I followed her out of the dining hall and into the quieter part of the house. She led me into the library, one of the few places in this house that had ever felt warm. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a dim lamp cast a soft glow over the mahogany desk in the center of the room. She motioned for me to sit. I didn't. "Tell me the truth," I said. "The real truth." She exhaled, her shoulders sagging under the weight of something she had clearly been carrying for a long time. "Your mother had an affair. The air in my lungs vanished. Your biological father, he wasn't the man sitting at that table tonight." I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. "Who was he?" She hesitated. "Someone your mother cared for once, but she chose to stay in her marriage. And when she got pregnant, she convinced your father to accept you as his own." My stomach twisted. "But he never really did he?" Grandma Eleanor shook her head. "No, he resented you for it. And so did your mother, in her own way." I let out a hollow laugh. "Great. So I was just a reminder of her mistake?" "No," she said firmly. "You were never a mistake, Alex." I stared at the bookshelves, at the endless rows of spines that blurred together in my vision. All my life, I had thought I wasn't enough for them, that I had simply fallen short of their expectations. But the truth was worse. I had never stood a chance. I sat down in the leather chair across from her, my mind racing. Did Clara know? Grandma Eleanor shook her head. She had no idea. Neither did you. And that was their choice. But you deserve to know the truth. I swallowed hard. And my biological father? She hesitated again. Gone. He passed away years ago. The finality of that hit me like a punch to the gut. I had spent my whole life searching for acceptance from people who were never going to give it to me. And the one person who might have, he was already gone. I clenched my fists. What do I do with this, Grandma? She reached across the desk, covering my hands with hers. You leave it behind. You build something better. You already have. I exhaled shakily. She was right. I'd spent years trying to prove myself to people who didn't deserve my effort, but I made it on my own. And now I had a choice. I could keep clinging to a family that had never wanted me. Or I could finally walk away. I looked up at Grandma Eleanor. "I think it's time." She nodded. "Then go, Alex." And for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. I left that library a different person. For years, I had carried the weight of my parents' indifference, trying to rationalize it, trying to earn their love. But now I knew the truth. I was never meant to be part of this family, and that meant I had nothing left to prove. As I walked back into the main hall, the party was still going, but the atmosphere had shifted. People were murmuring about my fellowship, whispering about the way the night had unraveled. My father and mother stood stiffly in the corner, speaking in hushed tones, no doubt trying to figure out how to salvage the evening. Clara was still at the table, absently stirring the drink in front of her, lost in thought. And then her eyes met mine. She stood, hesitated for a moment, then walked over. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not until tonight, I swear." I studied her face, searching for any sign of a lie, but I saw only honesty. She exhaled. "I don't even know what to say." "There's nothing to say, Clara," I said quietly. "It is what it is." She bit her lip, then looked down at her drink. I don't think I ever questioned why they treated us differently. I just assumed I deserved it, that I was supposed to be the golden child and you were supposed to be the one who figured it out alone. I let out a soft laugh. "That's the thing, Clara. You were never supposed to question it. That's how they built this entire dynamic." She was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I don't want to be part of that anymore." I tilted my head. "And what does that mean?" She swallowed hard. "It means I want to figure out who I am outside of them. Maybe for the first time." I sighed, feeling the weight of everything between us. "You'll be fine, Clara. You always were. But this family, you have to decide for yourself what to do with it." She looked at me then, her expression unreadable. "What about you?" I took a deep breath. "I'm walking away." I turned, stepping toward the exit. But before I reached the doors, my mother called out, "Alex, wait." I stopped but didn't turn around. "Are you really going to throw everything away over this?" she asked. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her face. There was no warmth in her expression, just controlled concern. The kind that wasn't about me, but about how my absence would look. I let out a slow breath. "You threw me away a long time ago." She flinched. My father just stood there, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He wasn't going to fight for me. He never had, and I had finally stopped expecting him to. I looked at Clara one last time, and she nodded. Not a goodbye, just an understanding. Then, without another word, I walked out the door. Leaving wasn't easy. I had no inheritance, no safety net. I had nothing except the fellowship and the future I had fought for. I packed up my tiny apartment, moved to New York, and threw myself into work. Residency was brutal, long hours, constant exhaustion, the pressure of proving myself in an elite program. But I thrived, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't working to impress anyone. I was doing it for me. The years passed quickly. I built a reputation in neurosurgery, made a name for myself in research. My work was cited in medical journals, my studies referenced by people who had never once looked twice at me in school. And somewhere along the way, I built a life. I met a woman who saw me for who I was, not who I'd been forced to be. We got married in a quiet ceremony, nothing extravagant, nothing like the forced celebrations my family used to throw. It was real. It was mine. I bought a home, not a mansion, but a place that was filled with warmth. And in the rare moments when I wasn't at the hospital, I spent my time there cooking with my wife, taking slow walks through Central Park, building a life I had once thought impossible. And through it all, there was one person who never changed. She never wavered. Through every holiday, every milestone, every achievement, she was there. The same woman who had sold her most precious possessions to help me chase my dreams, who had always believed in me when no one else did. She didn't live in that big house alone anymore. After I got my first major salary increase, I made sure she had everything she needed: a new roof, a renovated kitchen, a caretaker who helped her around the house when she needed it. Not because she asked, because I wanted to. One evening, years later, I sat beside her on her porch, watching the sun set over her backyard. She reached over, patted my hand, and smiled. "You did it, Alex," she said softly, "and you did it on your own." I looked at her, then out at the world I had built for myself. She was right. I didn't need my parents' approval. I never had. And for the first time in my life, I truly understood the freedom that came with knowing that. My parents tried to reach out over the years, polite emails, awkward phone calls, but I never answered. They weren't my family, not anymore. Clara and I kept in touch. We weren't the kind of siblings who called every week, but we saw each other a few times a year. We had dinner with our spouses, shared stories about work, about life. The past was still there, but it didn't define us anymore, and that was enough. As for me, I had finally stepped out of the shadows. I had built a life that wasn't just about surviving, it was about living. And in the end, that was the greatest success of all.